So I'm going to take over, and what I would like to do is I would like to just have a little bit of a discussion between panel members first. But as I do that, I will be monitoring the Q&A and trying to drop some of those questions in as well. So please do. The Q&A has been it's been pretty active, but if you have got any other questions, and particularly questions in response to what Ruth just said, please do put them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to them. So we've heard about, sort of, the definition of demography, and we've heard about ideas for rebranding it, and we've heard sort of about Ruth's key issues. And I have a couple of questions, and I'm not quite sure who would like to take these first. But one of my questions is, what is the responsibility of other organizations? So IUSSP is a small organization, it's a small network. As Nico van Nijmegen has been saying in the chat, it encompasses not just demography, but other disciplines as well. However, but the grant that set this particular strand of work off has ended. So there are certain things that a small organization can do. But what is the responsibility of other organizations, whether those are funding organizations, members of the global partnership, whether those are national governments, academia? Particularly, we heard from Mizuho about the challenges that most of this work is being done in English, and also the private sector. Let's not forget the private sector. So I wondered, would any of the panelists maybe like to offer some opinions on what is the responsibility of other organisations, and from that we can then infer, what can IUSSP, as this grant is wrapping up, what can it do in rebranding and reaching out to different groups of people? Would anybody like to take? I'm going to expand my screen so I can try and see everybody on that.
I can start that if
Claire,
it helps,
thank you.
please.
Yeah, thanks, Claire.
My connection isn't that great, so let me turn my, hope this works. So I mean, I think those of us who are active in the sort of world of data and have any sort of commitment or interest to working across disciplinary boundaries have a commitment really to a set of shared values, some of which Ruth talked about just now. I think there's a sort of commitment to, well, not everyone shares this commitment, but for us it's about, a commitment to using data to sort of change the world in a positive direction. So a commitment to data which is useful, a commitment to certain aspects of data quality, absolutely, representativeness, the importance of no one behind and so on, I think is really critical. A commitment to openness, both of the data itself and the sort of transparency around the methods and the assumptions that lie behind that. A commitment to interoperability, to a commitment to the whole idea of having different data sources which speak to each other rather than just one, rather than sort of one that seeks to dominate. So I think there are various kind of normative things around what are the characteristics of a kind of good data system, which all partners need to have a commitment to and work together on. But I think, within that, I'm not sure that any one discipline has a sort of commitment to any other over and above recognizing the value that it has in recognizing that it has a valuable contribution to make. I'm not sure that it's necessarily for sort of data scientists to have a commitment to statisticians or vice versa. I think they kind of all need to state their own case and demonstrate their own value. I think if a discipline can't be clear about its own contribution and the value that it brings to solving these common questions in a way that contributes to the overall system, I'm not sure that it's anyone else's job to do that for them. So I think we absolutely we all have a very strong commitment to, as I say, a sort of set of shared values about what makes a good system. But I do think it's really important that different parts of that system are sort of clear. I often, it's surprisingly hard to be clear about what your own contribution is in this wider ethos. And I think, all of us, and certainly this is true of us in the partnership, spend a lot of time thinking about actually what is it we're bringing to the table here, really? Why should anyone actually sort of want to spend the time working with us rather than someone else? And I think it's really helpful if everybody comes with a clear and confident sense of what they have to offer, and then it's much, much easier to negotiate and understand and be successful in actually operationalizing the partnerships, which are absolutely critical.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. I wonder, we have three representatives from academia on the panel, so that's Tom and Vitiho and Sam. I mean, it strikes me that it's actually quite important for sort of academic demography to really help to articulate this. Or is that a misperception on my part? That, you know, what Claire is saying is that the demography does now need to sort of reiterate what its role is in global debates around data. How do you think academic demography can contribute to that? Tom, was that you putting your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I mean, I think that, you know, clearly there is something for academic demography to do, and I think in the craziness of the last 10 months, yeah, what COVID has shown is what demographers, you know, why they matter, you know, in terms of, yeah, kind of working on the epidemiology, understanding, you know, kind of trying to avert some of the greater misinformation, and I think that academic demographers particularly have again been able to demonstrate the utility of a demographer's approach to understanding data, and particularly they're working with other disciplines, epidemiology, crucially, and so there is a particular role here, which I think, you know, the current crisis has actually given demographers a chance to show why their skills matter. But beyond that, I think, you know, we have to go back to what Sam said at the start. You know, where is academic training in this field going? Programs are struggling to recruit students, even graduate students, and that's not only in the global South. It's true of the UK as well. And, you know, kind of, where do we actually, you know, kind of, is demography going to become a canon and a series of methods and understandings and concepts and methodologies which can be grabbed by anyone and used? Or is the field actually going to say we're still going to try and preserve a disciplinary framework? And say, you know, what we bring is uniquely insightful, and so I think there the question is saying, you know, is the training which you're doing, is it fit for purpose? Are we able to sustain small departments and numerous institutions, or do we have to actually think of, you know, that certainly what we train as demographers has to be done very differently from here on out? I think Sam was probably going to want to comment on that too.
Sam, sorry, I can't. Oh, yes, there you are. Yep. Would you like to say something? Sam, you're muted.
Yes, I was going to say something similar, following on from Claire's comment. I think the reality here is that a demonstrated utility is the real value, and what's happening is that fields, disciplines, practitioners who can accomplish something useful to other people are being noticed and perceived as exciting, and things are following that kind of paradigm. It's essentially Darwinian. Like Tom said, we're having trouble recruiting students to this discipline, and I think that reflects the fact that there's more exciting things for them to do, and they're making choices based on what they see as the future for themselves and for the things they're interested in. So that makes me really wonder, like I did at the beginning, what is demography and what specifically do we bring to the table that augments these other things, or perhaps stands on its own, like Tom mentioned. And to be honest, I'm not dead sure that I have a good answer to that at this point in time. I see statisticians, I see computer scientists, I see epidemiologists and economists doing demography very, very well in the context of their own fields. And I see students being interested in those things and following that. But I also see something else, and that is back to what Deseo and Tom both mentioned as well. The way that funding has gone has prioritized some of these other approaches to doing demographic work. And we really do have a dramatic problem in terms of the way funding has concentrated in these, what Tom characterized as large labs in the North. We have a gigantic funding stream that's going to a very small number of people, really focused on a particular set of issues that overlap with demography. And I think that sucked the oxygen out of a lot of the rest of what we would all like to do. And so that affects the South disproportionately, but it also affects the North if you don't happen to be attached to one of these large labs or somehow in its orbit.
Thank you, Sam, for that rather depressing set of comments. You see, I wonder. There's a comment in the chat that that on the MOOC platforms like edX and Coursera, demography is sort of weakly represented compared to other social science disciplines. And given that you ran very successful summer courses in Cape Town where you brought together demography and social science, do you think there should be a much greater effort to engage globally online? Do you think there is still value in bringing people together? I mean, obviously, we need to consider what is going to happen post-COVID. But what are your thoughts on that, and whether that's a way to make a difference is to have a broader reach rather than just a deeper reach?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think that one thing that we have been successful to do with the summer school is also to make available the code that we have run, to make available all the teaching online to all people around the world. Okay, so that has been done. But if you go look on those tutorial, those courses that is online, is not branding as a demography, it's branding as mostly as data science. So what I try to do as a demographer during those summers is to make sure that we didn't forget the core of what it means to be demographer. The core is, for me, is about the quality of the data, and we are well positioned to talk about the quality of the data that we use as a demographer than any other academic that you can think about in social science. For many years, we have been in front of the quality of the data, and all the data that we use, we take care of the quality of those data to make sure that they are representative, to make sure that we deal with all the problems that they can have. But here is the point. When that comes to big data, we refrain ourselves because we say that the data are not representative. How can you, at the same time, try to respond to questions about the most vulnerable and representativeness? Most vulnerable are those who are not representative. So you have to reach them differently. And reach them differently means that you have to use those big data that is available today. So we have to reinforce and to make sure that our training are something that is relevant to people. So if I come back to make available our courses, we want to make sure that the courses that we make available is not, for my sense, the old demography, but the new one that we think about, who incorporate both the core demography and the new methodology that's becoming available, and make sure that we make the bridge between the two. Make sure that what is relevant in core demography will be used in the new type of demography methodology that we want to bring in demography actually. So that is the point I want to make. When I ask students about what is XML, what is HTML, what is JSON file, they just look at you. As a demographer, you are not trained about those things, but you cannot work today with data if you don't know nothing about JSON file, about XML file. So you have to incorporate those training and make sure that, yes, we open up to the whole world, bringing more tutorial, more courses online, but we have to start that in our classroom. We have to start that with a small change that we as a demographer, we make in our classroom. And those are not always very easy to make in some departments. You have to think about that. Yes, I let that there.
Yeah, we certainly found in our interviews that there were, there were definitely challenges in terms of the structure of academia to enabling these sorts of things to happen, and I think that's a whole other set of discussions. I'd like to turn to another question from the chat, which is, how can IUSSP, and let's say by IUSSP, let's not put all of the emphasis just on this small organization, where the grant has just ended, but it's about improving engagement with a number of country governments, including some of the larger ones that are maybe pretty weak in collating and sharing population-based information. And I think for that, maybe, I don't know, Manu, do you have a comment on that in terms of you're looking to the future and thinking about sort of future forms of engagement? Do you have a comment on that? Sure. It's about thinking about the future of engagement with country governments, where data collection data collection, collating and sharing of population-based information is quite weak. So you've had a lot of ideas about thinking about, what does the future data ecosystem look like, and could demography contribute to an understanding of that future data ecosystem? Is that something that you can see that national governments are likely to be interested in? Are they thinking that far in advance? And if so, what, how could we better engage with them? And then Claire, I'm going to come to you and ask you the same question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, actually, Claire made a few very good comments about the fact that it had to sort of go out of the lab. I mean, that's the way I interpret it. So that it should be about being more concrete, being more applied, developing projects. So some panelists mentioned the Grid 3 project. I mean, there are several others. I worked on the Opal project for a couple of years, and so for me, the big question is why do we do that? What's the end goal? And so I think we need probably a better theory of social change through data. And it sounds very abstract and very esoterical, but we don't create knowledge and insights just for the sake of creating knowledge and insights. I mean, this is maybe where my more activist mind comes in, but I would like to see actual change. I would like a demographer, population scientist, or people who study demography and use data in general to really wonder more, okay, what has this contributed to? Has this contributed to a policy change? Has this contributed to improving lives? Emma mentioned at the beginning, this causal link between better data and better lives. I mean, we know that it's much more complicated than that. There is politics, there is power, there is corruption, there is corporate interests and the like. So I do think that it's not just governments that we should target. I mean, there's the whole academic community, South in particular. There are NGOs that are also eager to get support from demographers to use data as a tool for advocacy, as a tool for advancement of some causes. And I understand that there is a line that as scientists, and let's stop in 30 seconds or 20 seconds, as scientists, we want to retain some credibility. So we don't want to be seen as only being activists, because if you don't have this scientific credibility, then everything you say next is much weaker. But I do think we have to think in this ecosystem terms, try to go on the ground, try to connect with local academia, NGOs, national statistical offices, and so on the basis of projects that would have objectives that go beyond just producing better data.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. And Claire, would you like to come in on this at all?
I don't have much to add to what Manu said. I agree with all of that. I guess I would only just say that in kind of practical terms, what does it involve to actually do this? And I think one of the challenges that we all face in the kind of world of data is that it tends to be very, very kind of producer driven. We think about data from the production side. How do we produce, because that is the job of most of the actors who are involved in the data space. But as Emmanuel just said, the value of data lies not in the production, but in the use. That's actually where it leads to changes in people's lives. So if you're interested in data beyond the sort of purely academic pursuit of perfect data, you have to think about it not just from the supply side, but also from the demand side, from the perspective of users, and really think, from the beginning. And I always feel like the best way to sort of conceptualize data is to start at the end and work backwards. Who is going to use this to solve what problem? And then to work backwards. Okay, in that case, what are the tools that we need to give them? What is the, and then you work right backwards through the chain to, okay, what is the data? What is the quality of the data? What is the analysis that we need to perform on that data? But there's a lot of stuff that sits between that. There's the presentation of that data. There's in what form the people who use it are not going to be the people who can actually read the sort of complicated methodological papers to explain what it says. There's a lot of different sort of points in the chain. And I think often I feel like that, you know, the challenges that we have is converting the kind of supply side to the point where it's actually going to be kind of useful to solve the particular challenge, which I think, you know, not, you know, for all of us on the panel at least, is at least one of the kind of objectives that we have and the reasons why we're interested in data. So I guess I would just add to what Emmanuel said, is to look, you know, to think like a user. Who are they and what is the problem they're trying to solve, and work backwards from that.
Thanks very much, Claire. I can see Tom and Sam, you've got your hands up. Tom, would you like to go first and then Sam?
Okay. Some pick up on what Claire's just said, because yes, you know, kind of a more user-focused source of data or approach to data is worthwhile. But again, you know, we as demographers are pushing the political economy of the data into the background. Who produces those data, for what purposes, and why, and who controls it, and who are the gatekeepers? And we've seen this throughout the SDG process. We've seen you know, the question whether there should be a top-down process where the countries should be able to choose and cherry pick the indicators they want to measure, choose who they want to leave behind by not asking questions about certain minority groups, for example. And then you've got the question of the role of the national statistical system, which you know, has wanted to set itself up as a gatekeeper, who is trying to stall and, you know, can ring fence what is deemed official statistics versus other sources. And that is a major political contestation, which we're never going to get to this nirvana of a user-focused data ecosystem until we grasp the nettle of the political economy of, you know, who creates data, is it top-down, is it bottom-up, who controls it, and why. And I think this is something which, you know, and I said in my opening comments, I think that demographers in some ways need to embrace. I mean, we are sociologists effectively by training anyway. We need to embrace our inner sociologists, our inner political economists, and actually grasp this nettle, rather than offering this fig leaf that we all can produce objective data which no one disagrees with. And we've seen that happen in recent years with population projections, which are clearly highly problematic. And we actually need to start saying, you know, as Sam has said as well, why is this happening, and what are the conditions that are giving rise to this set of events?
Thanks very much, Tom. Sam, are you picking up on some of those issues as well?
Yeah, picking up on some of those issues as well. So the user-defined data ecosystem has the significant challenges that Tom just outlined. And from the specific context of someone working in academia, there's another big problem. The motivations of the various players are misaligned. So I'll just give a very concrete example within academia. So primarily what we are involved in is training younger people to enter this field and be part of it, and also producing publications. And the publication process prioritizes things that may or may not have anything to do with being useful. And in many circumstances, in my experience, are completely useless. Getting a paper published that has a useful outcome, virtually impossible. Getting an arcane paper that, you know, further elucidates some strange corner of the literature, that's publishable. So we have a system that is in an important way involved in reproducing itself and creating the new practitioners, that is not lined up at all with being useful in the sense that Claire just outlined. So that's another element to consider when we think about the training agenda.
Thank you. And sorry, Manu, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just to yeah, absolutely, I absolutely agree with what, you know, Sam just said, and Tom as well, that this misalignment, and this is what I said, we need to strike a balance. I think my comment about trying to think more in terms of impact would be for maybe like let's say like older like demographers or more seasoned like demographers, because indeed when you do a PhD, it has to be science. So you have to push this little tiny thing to create new knowledge. And indeed, it's very hard, if not impossible, to have a paper that has an impact. I mean, that happens, you know, every 10 years or so many years in each discipline. I just want to go back in 30 seconds on my comment about, I really think that demography has a lot to bring to the study of the data revolution. Like, and looking back to the Industrial Revolution, it was a messy tough time. And so I'd like to see a theory of data, a theory of how data during the Industrial Revolution actually led to change, the scientific discovery, the scientific, etc. And like personally, like historical demography is the field that I found always to be the most fascinating. And I think there are lots of papers that could be updated, that could be used, that could be built on to try to understand the role of data in today's world and in the world of tomorrow on the basis of the lessons of history of the first and second industrial revolutions.
Well, gosh, I'm doing a PhD on the use of evidence in government, but on that impassioned speech, I think I might just switch to understand the historiography of data. Thank you, Manu. Matteo, I wanted to ask you something because when I was having a conversation with Ruth to talk about how she would how she was going to moderate this session, she said that one of the discussions that are going on reminded her of discussions that used to happen about what was called business demography. And I, several years ago, many years ago, when I think she and I were both at the same university together at the same time. And business demography was very much focused around getting people to think about marketing. That was what it was really used for. It was the private sector that really picked it up. And they were the people who were offering jobs to what were called business demographers. And I think this kind of relates to a question in the chat about discussing sort of digital ID data and privacy issues. And I wondered, so from your standpoint, sitting in academia and training, in your particular concern in training students from Francophone countries, do you have a view on how to, because I mean, what we've talked about so far has been very much about data and the public good. And I'm just wondering what's the boundary between the public good and the private good, and how demography can consider negotiating that boundary, and whether that's a fruitful set of issues to be thinking about.
I'm not sure if I properly get the question, but you want to see what is the link between public and the private sector in terms of what we can offer for as a demographer.
But also how can demography help to sort of provide a check on some of the more enthusiastic uses of data by the private sector?
Okay, so there is something that I want to add before I respond to that question, is that when we said that we don't have students who want to, we have less students in our program actually than what we want to have. I want to stress the point that if you go to Sub-Saharan Africa, in many institutions who train demographer, they have always plenty of students who are there. Okay, if you think about IFOD in Cameroon, if you think about NCA in Cote d'Ivoire, or ESSP in Burkina Faso, those schools for many years have still students who are doing their master program there. The challenge for them is to graduate to doctoral places, to become to have a PhD. Okay, so the challenge really is not at the graduate level of master. There are plenty of students who are still there. And the one thing that's happened is that those students who are trained, or those students that we train in our department in demography level, end up not working for public sector, but working of the private sector, because it's where they have the capacity to maybe make a sense of their life. Okay, when you come to statistics department, to Statistics Institute in Sub-Saharan Africa, in many of those places, those students didn't have the opportunity to bring themselves up. So you have, one of the challenges that we have is that we train people, but we don't have them working in the academia or in the research field to really change the focus of what should be done in Sub-Saharan Africa. I speak in the perspective of Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so those that we train, we like them to engage with them later in the academia and really focus on what's very important for us. So they end up, most of the case, working in private sector and mostly in the NGO and in the United States agencies, where they do strong things. But I think that we need them more in research area as well, to think and to develop many interesting research that can be very interesting and hopeful for people in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the point that I make is that those that we train end up having a job, and they have job. If you are trained as a demographer in Sub-Saharan Africa, there are no way that you don't have a job. Okay, from the perspective that I have, many people that I still know who have been trained in IFOD, in Cameroon, and so on, they still have a job, but most of the time they have the job in the places where their engagement, their contribution to the field of research is not what we expect them to do. And those challenges are still here today. When you train someone in the north, it's difficult for them to be recruited as an academia in the north as well. So either in the south, but also in the north here, where you have our students, it's very difficult to them to get a job in the academia. So they end up going to the private sector, most of the case. And we lost them in terms of real engagement. We lost them in terms of real capacity building, in terms of research that they can do, and contributed very rarely in Sub-Saharan Africa. I don't know if I respond to the question, but that is what I have in mind.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. Thank you very much, Hussein. I mean, there's a comment in the chat that the Groningen University in the Netherlands used to have a non-Western demography department whose students were required to spend 6 months doing practical demographic work, and it was a great mechanism for ensuring that academia connected with development work. But I wonder, is it also about really helping to ensure that demographers are focusing on the most pressing problems? So Ruth, let me just go back to my chat. Ruth was talking about, you know, really being able to focus. This was in her introduction, was to focus on some of the really key issues like urbanization, like climate refugees, some of those other things. Do you think that part of this is helping to ensure that demographers during their training are given more of an ability to really engage with some of these core issues, whether those may be sort of current issues, or as Manu's been suggesting, you know, really pushing it forward into the future? And if so, what do you think are some of the issues that maybe demography should be thinking about that isn't thinking about at the moment? And I'm just throwing that out to anybody who would like to answer that. Tom, you're looking pensive. Can I spot you?
No, I'm not sure I have much to add on that one. I need to meaning Tom Legrand, who's looking far more pensive than I am.
No, that's absolutely fine. Sorry, I've lost the chat box. So, oops, so I can't see what's happening in that. There we go. Can't see it going. Well, maybe that is the point to bring in Tom Legrand. Tom, is there anything that that you would like to say on that, or indeed on anything else that anybody has picked up?
Yeah, I actually prepared quite a few comments, and they've largely been bypassed by all of this very provocative and good discussion. I will probably listen to this webinar several times. There's a lot of very good ideas here. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be running a webinar for the Latin American Population Conference on rethinking demographic training for the future. And I think a lot of what is discussed today is of direct pertinence to that. I think I'd like to start by saying that I think that the initial premises of our data revolution projects funded by Hewlett are just as relevant today as they were in the past. But I think we've learned a lot more about how to move forward. Demographic data do form the bedrock of most measures of human activity and are used in the calculation of most SDG indicators and everything that's going to come after the SDGs. The skills of technical demographers, we've talked about it. They are clearly of value. We are experts in collecting population data. We're preoccupied with data quality, issues of not missing small populations, but also representativity. And I think most important probably is that we see variables and data as part of a larger framework of interlinkages between population stocks and flows, population structures and dynamics, and that allows for a much more accurate and better understanding, accurate calculation of key variables and key things. For me, what are the takeaways? One thing that I need to think a lot about is what was the bulk of this conversation, which is the existential issues raised by Sam and others. And where do we go from here? How do we try and rethink demography for the future? I am convinced that demography has a lot to give, but how do we maintain that and move forward? I think that our work, the projects have shown that there is a real openness on the part of non-demographers to work with population scientists on issues that are really important. They recognize that even if they often don't quite understand what are demographers, they recognize that we bring things of value. And I think we have to find ways to further expand partnerships, collaborations, and be more confident in inserting ourselves into these discussions, less modest about what we do, and highlight the value of and understandings of what demographers do in terms of what we brought up COVID. Some of the other very major issues, I think, the bulk of population, in fact, more than 50% of future population growth in the world is going to be in urban areas. There is enormous differences between urban neighborhoods. DHS data doesn't give you. How can we use demographic data combined with new data and new techniques to develop meso-level, small area understandings of the context in which people live, how that affects their welfare, how that affects their behaviors and outcomes. The same thing for population and the environment. There's going to be massive changes in the environment in the future years. And this is going to affect an awful lot of things, including things that are of central interest to demographers. How do we better understand that? All of this is linked to interoperability, being able to make the best of data from different sources, how to merge new data with old data. And one of the things that keeps being brought up, the importance of demography, our focus on maintaining high standards, high quality, and that we get data that our studies are done with a rigor that we're actually getting things of value. One thing that was brought up, I think, by Emma at the beginning, and one thing that I'm very worried is what I perceive to be a tendency in recent years by donors to focus much more narrowly on well-defined projects that aim to show in the short term impacts on policy and programs or maybe aspects of human welfare. They're very limited, and this approach neglects the fundamental need to develop local and national capacity to analyze the relevant issues well and to effectively implement the initiatives. Good evidence-informed policy and programs requires good data and the skills to use it. We are in a world of very rapid change, and both in terms of types of data available, the methods that are being used, and data scientists and researchers and demographers in low-income countries tasked with doing this often find themselves to be bypassed by all these new developments and marginalized in the entire process. Making a real sustainable development requires investing in capacity. And we haven't, the IUSSP has been trying to do that, but we're limited. And I would really put very high priority on that in the future if we have funding. This has been recognized by Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goal 17 talked about the enormous need of developing national capacity to do this. And I think this is especially evident in sub-Saharan Africa, where researchers and data professionals often find it impossible to acquire the skills needed to make use of these advances, and they're more and more marginalized, as I mentioned. There is a huge need to invest in the training for the next generation of data scientists and researchers in that region to provide evidence needed by decision makers. And I think longer term training, the model of what Romesh Silva did with our Civil Registration Vital Statistics Fellowships, what Viseo did in the summer school in Cape Town. And I know Sam had thought at one point, I still think this is an excellent idea. Try to use our ability to convene people, if we have funding, to create courses on extremely important issues in developing countries in Africa. Find a superb university in Africa and develop a 3-credit course on small area interpolation using Bayesian Bayesian methods, something of that sort. And do a combination of people from the North and the South, but that could afterwards be continued in the South. And you could foresee fellowships to bring in people from different countries. And you are developing endurable capacity in the South on things that are extremely important. I hear criticisms at times that we don't have enough developing country people on our work. We have made a real effort to involve people from the South in what we are doing. But I have to say that when you have a real scarcity in the lowest income countries of good people who can do this, that there's only so much you can do. I think that playing tokens and bringing in people or downgrading the level of techniques and innovations we're doing is not the right path forward. The right path forward is developing the capacity by these people, by people from the region, to really play a full role in these methods. There are a lot of things that have been brought up. The ODI review, they talked about the freight train of big data. Big data is hugely important, but I think there are other institutions, the IUSSP, that have really taken this on, Max Planck in particular. And this is probably not where the IUSSP should position itself, over and beyond maybe convening people for meetings on the ethics of big data, on the politics of big data, or biases inherent in big data. I do agree we definitely need to better position ourselves, and that requires a priori thinking of what we are and what we actually should bring to the table in next year's. I guess I want to end my remarks, if this is probably the time to end the seminar, by thanking all the panelists and all the participants who attended today's event. Again, I expect to be listening to this several times. I think this has been a very provocative and very good event. I also want to thank the Hewlett Foundation. Unfortunately, Ruth has left, whose foresight allowed the IUSSP to develop our activities in this area, and whose very sophisticated approach in grant making, structuring the grants, gave us the leeway to really do our work well and to make the best of opportunities as they arrived. I want to thank all the panelists today. I really did enjoy all of your remarks on all of the issues. And I know all of you squeezed time out of very busy schedules. I want to thank Louise and Emma. Hopefully every 7 years we'll have a chance to get together and work together again on issues of this sort. And finally, I think it bears real mention that all of our activities, and I think that our work has been a real success, not just the Hewlett work, but the work of our panels has been undertaken by highly committed and top scholars that gave freely of their time, squeezed their time out of very busy schedules to work on our activities. Our successes, our realizations are in very large part due to their generosity and their commitment. And I want to thank them very strongly. Okay, I hope this webinar will not just be a final keystone to mark the end of IUSSP work in this area, but that it will point the way forward to new work in this area for the IUSSP, but for the broader population community. I'm convinced that there remains a real need for the knowledge and skills of demographers, that what we can bring to the table of the development data world. And the challenges are finding the right venues, the right approaches, and also acquiring the resources necessary to take advantage of these opportunities.
I just wanted to say that I'm sorry that if we weren't able to get to all the questions that were posted in the chat, but I hope that you found the discussion addressed at least some of them. And with that, I'd also like to echo Tom's thanks to the panelists.